Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something that's honestly one of the most fascinating and kind of wild phenomena in the entire history of international sports. We are diving into how two vastly different nations took the exact same administrative loophole and used it to build literally unstoppable sporting empires. Seriously, it was like a master illusion. For decades, these state-run systems completely broke the whole concept of amateur baseball, and they did it by hiding massive professional-level machines right in plain sight.
25. Let that number sink in for a second. In the sports world, if a team repeats as a champion 2 or 3 times, we call it a dynasty, right? But winning 25 World Baseball titles, that is a statistical absurdity. No way around it. For most of the 20th century, the Cuban national team was practically invincible when it came to international amateur competition. I mean, they didn't just win, they absolutely steamrolled the competition, locking down 25 World Cup titles and 3 Olympic gold medals. For decades, the whole global sporting community just watched in total awe, scratching their heads, wondering what made this island nation so unbelievably untouchable. Well, as you'll see, the secret wasn't just some magic on the diamond. It was an absolute structural masterpiece off the field.
And just to prove to you that this wasn't some one-off fluke, 17. Halfway across the world, Taiwan racked up 17 Little League World Series championships between 1969 and 1996. Think about that. That's 17 titles in a tournament literally meant for 11 and 12-year-old kids. So today we're really digging into the sheer scale of this dominance. How on earth did two totally separate nations, operating in 2 completely different age brackets, manage to just utterly dismantle the rest of the world?
Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1, the amateur illusion.
So, for the longest time, international competitions, we're talking the Olympics, the World Cup, were strictly amateur events. Professionals were totally banned. But here's the catch. The word amateur can mean very, very different things depending on how a country's economy is set up. The traditional definition relies on athletes playing for the pure love of the game, with zero compensation, right? The whole point is to make sure competition is fair and kept at a community level. But over in Cuba, after the 1959 revolution, the government outright banned professional sports. The state essentially owned their players' labor, so a player's actual government-assigned employment was literally just to train and play baseball. And because they weren't signing private million-dollar corporate contracts with organizations like Major League Baseball, they were technically classified as amateurs under international law. But come on, in reality, these guys were full-time, state-funded professionals. Their one and only job in life was playing baseball.
To really wrap your head around the high contrast absurdity of these matchups, let's look at this like a baseball card comparison. On one side, you have the traditional world model. The United States, for example, would send over 19 to 21-year-old college kids. True amateurs, right? Guys who met up for maybe a few weeks before a tournament. Japan and South Korea, they were sending part-time players from corporate industrial leagues. But then, look at the Cuban state model. Because players couldn't leave for the U.S. major leagues, absolutely all of Cuba's elite talent stayed right at home. So Cuba was fielding grown men. We're talking 28 to 34-year-old full-time veterans right in their physical prime. Legends like Omar Norris and Orestes Quintalan. And they weren't just some thrown-together temporary all-star team. Oh no, they had played together all year, every single year for a decade. So when the game started, it was quite literally a matchup of fully seasoned men going up against college kids. It's wild to think about.
Moving on to Section 2, Central Control versus Community.
Now here is where it gets even crazier. This exact same professionalized amateur illusion was ingeniously applied to little kids over in Taiwan. Think about the foundational rule of Little League. It's all about geography, right? Teams are supposed to be made up of local neighborhood friends, getting together to practice maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just for fun. Well, the Taiwan state model basically looked at those geographical rules and tossed them out the window. They scoured the country, identified the absolute best 11 and 12-year-olds, and then illegally transferred them all to one single school. So picture this, an American team of local buddies steps onto the field thinking they're playing another neighborhood team, but actually, they were walking into a buzzsaw. They were facing a highly filtered national all-star super team. No wonder they dominated.
Which brings us to Section 3, Factories of Talent. Let's pull back the curtain on how they actually pulled this off.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the actual process. You see, neither of these nations just sat around waiting for talent to naturally develop. They proactively engineered it from the ground up. Over in Cuba, they basically took a Soviet-style centralized planning model and applied it directly to baseball. It's like a giant puzzle. Physical education teachers were tasked with evaluating virtually every single 6 or 7-year-old child on the entire island. If a kid showed, say, unusually good reflexes or a really strong arm,
Boom, they were drafted into these highly specialized state sports schools, known as EJIDs. From there, it became a rigorous, militarized boarding regimen, complete with scientific coaching and strictly controlled nutrition. By the time a player actually made it to the national team, they had already survived thousands of fierce internal cuts on what was essentially an assembly line of elite athletic production.
And Taiwan? They mirrored this extreme centralization almost perfectly, just tailored for preteens. They scouted national talent right at age 11 and funneled those kids into single locations like the famous Minisu Elementary School. But honestly, the training regimen is what truly separates this from anything you'd consider traditional youth sports. These kids were put into strict training camps. We're talking practice 7 days a week for 8 to 10 hours a day, drilling thousands of military-style repetitions. For 11-year-olds, the sheer volume of practice was completely unprecedented for children of that age. It's honestly mind-boggling.
That leads us into Section 4, Propaganda on the Diamond. Let's talk about the why.
So you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Why would a state government invest such massive infrastructure, time and money into amateur baseball? Well, it wasn't just about a pure love for the game. There were massive geopolitical motives at play here. As one observer perfectly put it, it was a way to yell to the world that they still existed. For the Kuomintang government in Taiwan, the 1970s brought on some really severe diplomatic isolation, especially after they were expelled from the United Nations in 1971. So winning the Little League World Series on American television, that was an undeniable, highly visible way to project national competence and basic survival to the rest of the globe. And similarly, for Fidel Castro's government in Cuba, completely dominating the United States, the literal birthplace of baseball, in international amateur tournaments, was an incredibly potent tool. It was perfect for Cold War propaganda and for building this strong, triumphant national identity.
However, I want to make sure we're totally clear on one thing. It is absolutely crucial to understand that these state systems amplified the talent, but they definitely did not invent it out of thin air. Cuba's dominance wasn't just magically created by the 1959 revolution. Actually, baseball had been deeply rooted in Cuban culture since all the way back in the 1860s. It had long served as a powerful symbol of their national identity. Even way before the revolution, Cuba boasted the strongest professional league in the entire Caribbean, and they were already producing immense stars for the U.S. major leagues. Simply put, the island naturally breathed baseball. What the state system did was take that massive, pre-existing cultural passion and industrialize it with essentially unlimited government resources.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when the rules finally change as we head into Section 5, the Empire's Fall.
Because ultimately, no illusion lasts forever, right? Eventually, the structural loopholes that let these state systems dominate were firmly closed. In the 1990s, a severe economic crisis hit Cuba and began to seriously crack the foundation of their whole system. This sparked a massive exodus of elite players who left the island to seek actual paying professional contracts over in the U.S. Meanwhile, over in the youth sports world, the U.S. Little League organization finally cracked down. They implemented incredibly strict residency checks and started requiring verified birth certificates. Faced with these new, unavoidable geographic rules, Taiwan actually voluntarily withdrew from the tournament in 1997. And the final nail in the coffin for the adult amateur illusion, that came at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. The rules were finally changed to allow verified major league professionals to compete globally, which permanently closed that massive talent gap.
So we've seen how rules that were simply meant to foster fair community-level amateur competition were completely overpowered by the centralized resources of determined states. And it really forces us to ask, can international sports ever truly guarantee a level playing field when national pride and geopolitical survival are on the line? It's such a fascinating question about the intersection of global rules and state ambition, and honestly, it's a puzzle that sports governing bodies are still wrestling with even today. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this wild slice of history. I really hope this explainer gave you a whole new lens through which to view the sports we watch on the world stage.